Good morning, everybody. Great to have you here. I see people are still joining, so we'll give everyone a few minutes to connect to audio. Hello, lots of familiar faces here. Some new faces and names. That's great. We've got a large group today, just the way we love it. So welcome, everybody, to March's Senior Social. My name is Lauren Spring, and I'm an art educator with the Art Gallery of Ontario. And I'm here today with one of my colleagues. Would you like to introduce yourself, Kel?
Hi, I'm Kelly Aiken, and I'm an adult educator at the AGO.
Wonderful. And so, as some of you likely know, because I know some of you have been in these sessions before, we have a really fun time together. We're going to look at two works of art around a certain theme. And so this morning, we're going to focus on the theme of weather. And we're going to look at a work by Patterson Ewan and one by Nakamura. So both artists that are very interestingly positioned because their work is semi-abstract, sometimes not, and sometimes really in between. But both of them really did spend a lot of time out in nature and focused on weather. And so Kelly and I thought at this particular time of year when the seasons are starting to change, and most of us, I think, are looking forward to springtime, it would be a nice opportunity to speak about weather too and see some of the techniques they've used and then to practice them. So we'll, the first kind of half of our session together today, we'll be looking at these two works of art. And then Kelly and I'll lead those discussions with my squeaky voice. And then Kelly will be guiding us through an art making activity for the second half. So here's a photograph of the Art Gallery of Ontario, of course, located in downtown Toronto. And I am curious to know where folks are joining us from today. We can see a nice bright blue sky with some clouds in the background when this picture was taken, but very likely we're all experiencing different weather. One of my favorite things about these sessions is that we're joining from all different places. So I, this morning, am in Guelph, and it's, sky is blue, a few clouds, lots and lots of snow on the ground. My husband built a big igloo in the backyard for our daughter, so that's a pretty fun thing to look out onto. And yeah, maybe just right into the chat. Where are folks joining from? We've got a few from Toronto.
And I'm just going to add that I'm actually in Victoria today, and I just went over to the window to see above the fir tree that's across the road, and it looks like sun and a bit of white cloud today, which is really nice. So yes, that's the weather here in Victoria, BC.
And it looks like in the chat, a lot of folks are in the Toronto, Etobicoke, East York, Mississauga region. And I will share with you that Kelly is not only in Victoria, but she's in a very special house in Victoria, who our Canadian art aficionados will probably be very excited to hear. Do you want to share where you're staying right now, Kelly?
Absolutely, Lauren. Thank you. I'm in the neighborhood where Emily Carr was born and raised, and I'm in an apartment in Emily Carr's House of All Sorts, which is a rooming house that she purchased, I think, after her parents passed away as a way of kind of augmenting her income. It's a wonderful apartment, a little fourplex, and my friend has been living here for 4 years. She says often she'll look out the window, there'll be many people pointing their cameras at the house. But just around the corner from here is Emily Carr's parents' place, and they've parked Emily Carr's van, which I think she called the Elephant, in the side, and you can go and look inside it. And it's a beautiful walking neighborhood, and it's already spring here, and can really see, I can feel, my friend says that she can really feel Emily Carr's energy here.
No doubt about it. That was a big energy that she had. So
Yeah.
I'm very jealous both of your spring weather and your accommodation. So yeah, so Kelly's going to bring us, it looks like most other folks are from, we've got some folks from London, but yeah, mostly within Ontario, and very great. And so Kelly will bring us the extra sunshine today. And the crocus is probably starting to bloom. I also do just want to take a moment to acknowledge that the land the AGO is on is Mississauga Anishinaabe territory, Mississauga. It is also governed by a treaty between the Mississauga of the Credit and the Canadian government. Toronto is Mississauga Anishinaabe territory. It has also been occupied by other Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat Confederacies.
And the land that I'm on is originally the land of the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations.
Wonderful. So let's start here with a work. This is essentially a triptych by Patterson Ewan. He made these pieces in 1974. And I'm curious to hear from folks. Some of you might be quite familiar with Patterson Ewan's work. We have a number of them in our AGO collection. For other folks, this might be brand new to you. So why don't we just put a few words in the chat that come to mind, whether you know Patterson Ewan or this is the first time you're encountering his work, a few words in the chat that come to mind when you look at these pieces. We've got West Coast. Okay, so obviously some mountains here, rugged. Oh yeah, and for Elaine, his work is new. That's great. Yeah, changing weather, ephemeral nature of weather. Yeah, that's beautifully said, Michelle. Thanks. Desolate. Yeah, these ones seem rather unpopulated. Dramatic weather. Yeah, and it's quite fascinating, right? Because we can see, I mean, the third one in the triptych here is a little bit darker and harder to see, but this is the exact same location. But of course, vastly different weather, vastly different sky and water and sort of colors playing in the mountains. Yeah, Linda saying the coast and the mountains. Yeah, so really kind of three beautiful things. And I think sometimes when we think and reflect about landscape painting, we really take for granted all of the different techniques that are involved in painting the landscape, right? Because the sky is its own complicated entity. So is the earth, in this case, mountains. And then of course the water too communicates so much and the energy can be so different. And we know that there was a tradition, of course, when artists started painting outside, especially the Impressionists back in France in the mid-19th century, that it brought something very different, right, to what they had formerly been doing when they were staying in their studios and kind of imagining different weather patterns and light, etc. Actually being there on location added a whole new dimension to the works that they created. It impacted the impressions that their brushstrokes would make. And then also this idea, and it's one of my favorite things actually about Emily Carr, how she would get very attached to certain landscapes and return to the same place, even the same forest and the trees again and again, just to see it in different moods and different lights and different weather. And, this particular time of year is an interesting one, of course, because it sounds like most of us are in Ontario, so we just had the pretty dramatic snowstorm again on Friday, and it shuts down things, right? You kind of are going about your day and all of a sudden it starts to move in. And so those words that a lot of you included, yeah, dramatic, desolate, and how ever changing and ephemeral it can be, is hugely impactful. Now, Patterson Ewan is he's a fascinating figure. He was interestingly associated with one of the first abstract art movements in Canada, which was Les Automotifs, coming out of Quebec in the late 1940s. And so some of you may be familiar with some other members of the Automotifs group, like Jean-Paul Riopelle and Émile Bourdois. They were sort of the founders of the movement. And it really was about abstraction. Now you might be looking at these pieces that I'm talking about and thinking, well, these are clearly landscapes. And in some cases, Patterson Ewan did do landscapes, and he was really, there's something that I love about him is he sort of existed in this space in between. So sometimes he would do figurative works, other times his works were purely abstract. Other times there are elements of both. And the same thing goes for the type of medium. So I'm just going to share a close-up of the first one in the triptych here. And if we take a more careful look at the materials he used, we'll see we've got acrylic and metallic paint on gouged plywood. This plywood quickly became one of his mediums of choice. And again, for me, he's in between sort of two mediums here, is because when you look at his works of art, and these ones are sort of rather tame, but oftentimes on his plywood, not only does he gouge into it, but he'll also kind of nail different things. We have one at the AGO, we have the big sole of a shoe that he's nailed in there. He often has, other pieces of metal that he attaches, and leather and kind of other elements, so much so that when you look at them, sometimes you think, okay, is this a painting or is it a sculpture? Because it is three-dimensional in its own way, and certainly he's using materials that we tend to associate with sculpture, like wood and metal. So he's kind of in between figuration and abstraction, and also in between sort of painting and sculpture. Now, one of the things that's quite fascinating about him too is how he came to start to use plywood. Now, he was living in Montreal, and he ended up meeting a woman named Françoise Sullivan, who was associated with Les Automotifs. And I'm curious to know, before I go on about this, if folks in the group are familiar with the Automotifs movement. Anyone have any words or particular pieces that they would associate with what they've heard so far about Les Automotifs? You can type into the chat or unmute yourself. Or if it's new to you too, that's okay. I'll share a little bit more.
Well, they were really kind of embracing the notion of in the kind of contemporary art world at the time of abstraction. And I think there's an enormous amount of energy in the Automatistes painting, and a lot of emphasis on the moment, I think, and the moment of creation.
Absolutely, yeah. Spontaneity was kind of the rule of the game for them. And they were primarily painters. That was the tradition. And Émile Bourdois was teaching at art schools in Montreal too. And so they were masters of their painterly craft, and were traditionally trained, but then wanted to break away from that, and were really inspired by a lot of sort of the automatic painting and automatic writing that was happening in Europe and in New York. Well, Les Automotifs, maybe while I'm speaking, maybe one of our tech support could type that into the chat. Yeah, Les Automotifs, which actually is a nice link to what we're saying, because it means automatic. And so they were primarily painters, but then because they wanted to create spontaneously, they would include others in their sort of happenings. So Françoise Sullivan was a dancer who would sometimes attend some of these sessions. And so essentially, what would happen is that they would want to find different ways to create in the moment. So sometimes they would have, kind of blank canvases around them. They'd have a musician that was maybe improvising something on the saxophone. Françoise Sullivan would maybe be there dancing to the music that she felt in the moment. The painters would then watch her movements and then paint accordingly. So it was all about spontaneous creation. And any of you who've maybe engaged in either, spontaneous drawing or painting or writing have probably realized that there's beautiful things that come out in doing that. And it's a way of sort of tapping into the unconscious or the subconscious in ways that help turn off that rational part of your mind that's maybe judging, oh, this is good or this is bad, or where's this going? And just, giving yourself, okay, time myself for 5 minutes and just write nonstop. And then you see what comes out. Maybe it's dreams, maybe it's a shopping list, maybe it's whatever. But that was their approach. And a lot of their paintings are again, almost sculptural. We have a really beautiful Paul-Émile Bourdois that essentially has, he's kind of layering, he's using a palette knife. And when you stand in front of it, it looks almost sculptural because it's just, kind of sticking out in interesting ways from the canvas. And Riopelle would do the same type of thing. So there was already this almost sculptural tradition and this innovative approach to working with materials. And Patterson-Ewan, this movement really started in the late 1940s. was also linked to some politics in Quebec, calling for separation of church and state. And there's a lot more to unpack with the movement in general. But for our purposes today, Patterson Ewan became caught up in this, really interested in exploring abstraction and spontaneous creation in these ways. But then eventually became a little bit bored and wanted to experiment with other mediums. And so he started at one point, he said, well, I'm going to try printmaking. And so he had these old pieces of plywood, and he thought, okay, I'm going to, take it and I'm going to gouge into it and then turn it into a print. But apparently, as the story goes, he had this piece of plywood in front of him. He made his, scratches on there, and then looked at it and thought, wait a second, I don't need to print this. This is the artwork in and of itself. And then from that moment on, he started working with bigger and bigger pieces of plywood, and becoming more and more dramatic. It was almost a sport for him. He would wear knee pads, and there's some great videos on YouTube if you want to see him. But he'd be sort of like wearing knee pads up on the table on top of this plywood, like gouging into things. Sometimes, his holes would get too deep and, go right through the plywood, and he built that into his canvas too, and the story being told. So yeah, very kind of embodied approach to creation here. And I think
I'm just going to interrupt here for a second, Lauren, because I think that for Patterson Ewan, that moment was just so seminal and so much a part of him kind of finding his voice. And as you said, which I think happens for a lot of artists, in a way, it's almost a segue or an accidental discovery of how important that it absolutely changed what he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's beautiful. I mean, I know some of you are professional practicing artists too, and perhaps have had your own revelations like that with different mediums, or what you thought something was going to become something completely different. And I just want us to focus in on, I'm just going to show the close-up so we can compare these three pieces. And just now that we know that, it's not only paint here, but actually sort of gouges into the wood itself, adds something, for me at least, it adds something to the drama. And Kelly and I were chatting about, the art that we're going to be making today, and how we process weather, how we experience weather. And one of the key things that we'll focus on in our art making is the sky. And in these cases, it's quite beautiful because we have the sky also reflected in the water, so we can appreciate his mastery in being able to do that too. But I just, in this particular piece, also want us to focus in on these lines. We can imagine perhaps, it's rain sort of shooting down. I think we've all been in storms like that, where it's just, almost like sheets of rain pouring from the sky. And then also knowing in this case that they're actually kind of, essentially gouges and scratches. Makes it all. And then this piece too, obviously more of a nocturnal one. And there's something really beautiful going on in the sky here. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure what these orange ones are. Patterson Ewan did love shooting stars. We have a beautiful piece at the AGO inspired by a particular shooting star. But do you have any thoughts on what these orange ones might be, Kel?
Well, I think there's this thing in a long tradition in painting of an underpainting. So one of the things that happens when he gouges out is that he's revealing another layer, a deeper layer. And in the cases of the sky, he's painted them orange. It's possible that he's capturing the moment right after sunset when. The sky is pretty dark, but it could be stormy dark as opposed to dark in terms of the time of day. And you know how there's a way in which when the sun is dipped below the horizon, but the clouds still carry a little bit of that fiery reflection. So that might be my guess. At the same time, it might be just a nod to the history of art and the sense of underpainting, because he's used the gouges, he's painted the gouges white and then overpainted, just dragging his brush along the surface or his roller along the surface with gray for the water to preserve the white that has been painted into the gouges, and has probably done something similar in the sky area. It's it's hard to know. I mean, one of the wonderful things about being close to a painting, especially one as visceral as this, as physical as this, is that we can feel the presence of the artist, but we can't really know what they were thinking.
Mm. That's so nicely said, and it's true, given the medium, like Kelly's saying, on any canvas there can be underpainting, but especially when you're using the tools that he was and gouging into things, it reveals that underlayer in whole new ways. I'm curious for folks. I see Myrna in the chat has said it has a very ominous feel.
Mhm.
I'm curious if others would want to be here when, if you look at this, if we focus on this particular one, is this a place you'd want to sort of travel to, or be sleeping and wake up in the middle of the night and look out your window and have this view? I see some heads shaking. Hmm.
Well, the interesting thing too is that where is the viewer located? We're in the water, right? We're not on land. So we would be in a boat, or we would maybe be on an opposite shore, but it really feels like we're in open water. And that's a feeling that's most pronounced in this third panel, that
Mhm.
we feel I think you feel cold when you look at this one.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree with that. It'd be hard to, yeah, imagine this as a warm painting. And I think that idea of, yeah, being in the water is really key, right? Because if we think back to a lot of impressionist painters like Monet, and sometimes they'd be on location, but then other times we know they're from their hotel room just looking out at this
Yeah.
beautiful landscape. This is not the case with this one, right? This is, yeah, you're kind of in in the ocean here. Um, and Michelle is saying it feels like it's a thunderstorm with lightning. Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
really beautiful, right? How that's kind of reflected in that water, that kind of crackling energy. Yeah. And I mean, I think if we're feeling some darkness here at this point too in his life in 1974, he did have a pretty tumultuous life. His marriage to Francoise Sullivan didn't last. They had 4 sons together, and he was very open near the end of his life. He was talking about his constant struggles with depression and how art was often therapeutic for him in a lot of ways, especially that kind of sportive, full-bodied energy he brought to creating these pieces. So he would put a lot of this kind of emotion. Have a few other notes in the chat here. Dale is saying it feels damp, cold, threatened. Oh, really good words, huh? Threatened. That one resonates with me. Brenda is, I feel it as moonlight on Hawaii. I like that. I feel like if I knew that that's what it was, I'd be more willing to transport myself into a boat in the middle of the night. Yeah, but there is something almost volcanic about it, right? With those orange in the sky. Um, yeah, the dark seems exaggerated. Marian's feeling chaotic. Mm. Yeah, it's not necessarily a peaceful evening at all, is it? Now, another artist who very similar in some ways was inspired by abstraction, but different province, was Kazuo Nakamura. And now Nakamura, he was born in Canada. His parents were from Japan. He was born in Canada out in BC, so also fitting that Kelly is joining us from that part of the country today. And studied art early on. And then I believe it was 1942, when he was just, I think, 15 years old, his family was put in an internment camp for 2 years, and then eventually he resettled in Ontario and continued his art studies after that. Obviously, very traumatic experience for him and his family, and impacted his relationship with this country. And soon after, in the 1960s, he ended up becoming part of this other famous abstract artist group in Canada called the Painters 11. Jack Bush was also part of it. A few other names that you'd probably, Harold Town, that you'd probably recognize from Canadian art history or have seen on the walls of the AGO or other art galleries. And they were another group of abstract artists, similarly interested in expressive abstract work, but also taking some different approaches to essentially united around abstraction. But Kazuo Nakamura, his work always stood out slightly. So the group only lasted a couple of years. I think it was 1960 to 1960. What were they? It was 1950 to 1953. They officially formed. And then by 1958, they had disbanded already. And then he kind of went out on his own and continued making art. So this particular piece was made, when the group was just uniting. And again, you can see here, so the title gives us a big clue into what this is, plowed field. And once we know that, I think that certainly contributes to our interpretation. But if we didn't have that title, this is again one similar to Patterson-Ewan that could almost be abstracted. And he, of all of the members of the group, was the one who again existed sort of in that space in between abstraction and figuration. He was also, as Kelly and I mentioned at the start, very fascinated by weather. And so, yeah, certainly we could see how this, could be considered an abstract painting if it were, say, called Untitled Number 3, might see something like sky and some sort of landscape. But Nakamura was fascinated by science and math, and a number of works that he went on to create were actually sort of very analytical. He was fascinated by universal patterns in nature, especially, meaning that, if you take one little thing like a snowflake or a leaf, for example, and you examine sort of the veins in the leaf and the way that, they're designed in a way that's very similar to a whole tree is designed, that same sort of pattern that then also, is very similar to how our lungs might look, on some sort of medical scan. So these kind of universal patterns in nature were really fascinating to him, and would often inform his approach to abstraction. And Kelly, this is a painting that I know that you really love. Is there anything you want to share with us about what you love about this work?
Well, I teach watercolor at the AGO, and I teach it on my own, and I've practiced watercolor since I was at university and had quite a wonderful professor who taught me the basics. But what is traditionally, watercolor artists are often doing something fairly representational and fairly, it can have a tendency to be a little bit tight. And what I love about Nakamura is there's incredible looseness in this. And again, like Patterson-Ewan, but with a completely different medium, there's this sense of real vigor in the application of the paint, and it's maintained even years after the painting has been finished. And the technique that he's using is called wet into wet, where the whole surface of the paper is dampened or moistened, and then the paint is applied. He's really only used a couple of colors, but there's a beautiful section right in the middle. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but yeah, thanks, Lauren, where there's this lovely kind of sea green quality that happens, whether it's the mix of, I believe that he's using Prussian blue and either burnt umber or sepia. There's that strange kind of floating brown up in the top part of the painting. But that area in the center with this little vestige of a kind of yellowy and then a greeny section really takes us back into kind of light at the horizon. I don't know. I think it's a very strong painting, but probably painted very quickly, and in all likelihood, because Nakamura was so interested in mathematics, patterns, weather, climate, it's probably something that, it just brings all of his thoughts and processes to bear on that one moment of creation.
Thanks, Cal. And I'm curious, we had some great words in the chat about Patterson-Ewan's sort of nocturnal one there. What are some words that you might toss into the chat about this one? How do you feel when you look at this particular painting? And would you like to be in this place? Marianne is saying, I love the minimalist approach to this painting. Yeah, so much achieved with so few colors.
Exactly.
Yeah, dreamy. Very nice. It is phenomenal how, yeah, just with so few colors, with certain techniques, it can really enhance mood. Michelle saying, I want a thick sleeping bag and a tent. Ooh, that was urgency,
Yes,
passion.
it is a
That's a
passion.
fascinating one, huh? Because there is this sense of calm, like the colors themselves are quite calm, and yet, and the flow and the bleeds are dreamlike, and then yeah, and wispy and wistful, great words, Anne. But then also, yeah, there is this kind of urgency and passion, and this sort of undertone of that. A lot of different energy all mixed in one here. Thank you, folks. So for the sake of time, why don't I hand things over to Kelly and we will start creating some works of our own. I'll just stop sharing my screen, Cal.
Hi, everyone, again, and I just want to show you the materials that I've got, and I'm going to work in both of these medium. Just going to move some of the other things out of the way and do a little bit of clicking here for a second. Sorry, I'm just dropping down. Chat for a moment, opening the screen. Okay, so what I have, this is my palette, I Like a Dirty palette, which I've actually kind of sort of cleaned out. I have, if you have a watercolor set, it may not be like this, but just as a quick kind of thing, I have my yellows here, my reds here, blues, and a brown. I don't have green in my palette because I mix it. And I'm going to show you a few techniques for getting some glorious sky colors. I also have chalk pastels. I thought I had packed my chalk pastels into my suitcase and hadn't. So my friend and I walked up to Opus in Victoria, which is a marvelous art supply store. And I almost couldn't find the chalk pastels. I was beginning to panic. And then I asked someone and got, these are Winsor Newton soft pastels. So what I'm going to do just to begin is talk a little bit about how we'll approach this. I'm going to do some watercolor painting as we speak. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about skies and how skies traditionally, if I don't know what's outside your window, but outside mine, the sky is quite light and quite beautiful. And in order to achieve basically a sunny sky, I'll work on two small landscapes here. We can go at the horizon with you'll notice if you look out across a landscape, and probably even somewhere you can look out your window, you look at the sky closer to the ground, the sky is a lighter blue. And then higher over your head, the blue becomes more intense and more concentrated. So we actually, when we're in my sort of somewhat standard watercolor palette, I would do cerulean at the horizon, cobalt partway up the sky, and ultramarine blue higher up. But what Kazuo Nakamura did was he took a color that we often associate with sort of marine descriptions, so a sea color, or he took something like either Prussian or phthalo blue. I believe he used Prussian, and he just makes those beautiful shapes, adds those into the water on the page. I'm going to do a little bit right now. Just going to wet a section here. Of course, he comes from the tradition. He comes from a tradition in the East where every stroke counts. So if I just I'll show you what brushes I use. These are standard sizes for me. 12, 10, 8, and 4. Whatever you've got is fine. I'm just going to take out my size 10 brush. I'm going to mix up a little bit of I'll mix a puddle of cerulean. This gorgeous, sorry, you need to see this. This is this gorgeous, it's a greenish blue. Cobalt blue tends to be right in the middle. This is my cobalt. And then ultramarine blue is it looks black in my palette, but it's a red blue. So we have a greenish blue and a reddish blue, which means that it's starting to lean towards purple, okay? Just beginning to lean towards purple. I just stuck, I realized I'm working fast, so I just stuck my palette down on top of my paper. We will see if there's any splotches on it when I come back. Okay, so these are the colors I would traditionally use for the sky. Cerulean to cobalt to ultramarine. Oh, just a little bit of. I like to work with either paper towel, toilet paper, or Kleenex in hand. Let's just say we have a horizon here, and I'm just going to. Now, there's a lot of different ways of painting with watercolor. But anything you do is going to work. So here we go. These are the three colors that I might use to describe the sky. But I want you to think about what your sky is doing outside your window. So I might blend these a little bit more. And if I've got clouds in the sky, I'm going to use this very simple technique. I'm going to mix these two colors together. This is what I'm doing. Shove things over. I'm going to take my cerulean, drop it into my cobalt. This is kind of a standard sky color on a clear day. I'll just add a little more of that into the mix here, keeping it nice and moist, because remember I put moisture down on the page before I started. If I want to make some cloud shapes, I'm just going to take a piece of Kleenex or toilet paper or paper towel, just going to wrinkle it like this and go. So this pretty much, I'm just going to run over to the window. No. Yeah. That kind of describes what's happening in the sky today. It's actually quite light. It's that early morning because I'm 3 hours ahead of you guys in Ontario. I'm just going to really, this lovely thing that happens with the Kleenex is that you'll have the paint interacting a wet area and a dry area, and you have this little frontier of dryness. Okay. Now the thing that Kazuo Nakamura did, it's really beautiful, and I think we should just give that a try too. He's got a very dense color, so I'm going to take into my ultramarine blue. I'm going to take some Prussian. It's hard to tell on my palette because oops, look at that. In my palette, these three colors look black. This is ultramarine blue, Prussian blue, and dioxazine purple or dioxazine violet. I'm just going to, there's that gorgeous Prussian that Kazuo Nakamura did. So I'm just going to mix up some of this. I'm going to do something very similar to him, but I'm going to make it as if it's the water down here. Well, again, I'll wet this area. Still a fair bit of moisture here. You can sometimes check. I'm tipping my paper so that I can see whether there's a sheen on it. And that sheen means I still have a lot of moisture, a lot of time to work. So let's see if anybody's speaking and saying anything. Thanks, Natalie. Natalie is writing into the chat the things that we can do when we're painting. Actually, I think he probably used a bigger brush, so I'm going to switch over to my number 12, and I'm just going to streak across the sky like I think he might have. In this case, because I'm doing it in this position on my page, it could be water. It could be like the ocean. And I really feel with Kazuo Nakamura, it's as if he treats the sky sometimes like it is the ocean, like it's an overhead body of water. So I'm going to let you guys maybe do something like that. If I'm going to just put this aside for the moment and get my other pad over here, because some of you may only have chalk pastel. I'll just put my watercolor aside. I do it so that you can see it still. Let's see, moving everything around here.
And I'll just chime in too while Kelly's setting up. Feel free in the chat if you want to share some of how that's going for you. If you tried that, that looks really beautiful what you've just created, Kel. And so, yeah, if folks have questions about this technique or you just want to celebrate that you've discovered something new and it's working out well for you too, feel free to communicate with us in the chat, or you can always unmute yourself and ask a question that way too.
Yeah, please unmute yourself and talk. It's quite lovely to hear from you. So in my group of chalk pastels, I have this lovely range from white to black, and I'm going through the yellows, the oranges, blues, and a few greens and browns. I've never used these Winsor Newton pastels before, so I'm kind of excited about working with them. So I'm going to do something a little bit similar to Patterson-Newlands, where I'll just create a long landscape. So I have a horizon. One thing that we need to know is that when we're describing water, where land interacts with water, we need a line that is parallel to the bottom or the top of our page. So it needs to be horizontal. And this is because when we're describing, I have some very interesting bleeding here. When we're describing water, it's a flat plane, unless it's a really sort of tumultuous ocean and there's a whole lot of wind and storm. Water achieves this flat plane. And in order for us to describe that on a two-dimensional surface, we need a line that's horizontal, that's parallel to the bottom of our page. So I'm just going to create this sort of, this is, it's quite possible that Patterson-Newman was somewhere in Vancouver or on the island when he painted those, when he gouged or he was thinking of a coastal scene like Georgia Strait when he was creating those panels, because he calls it, I think, is it coastal trip, Lauren, or coastal something?
Yeah, what was it? Coastal, I'll find out. Coastal view, coastal.
Blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to very quickly, with a few different colors here, got some liquors. I'm going to try a little bit of this purple in here.
Coastal trip.
Coastal, great. I've got a more tissue, toilet paper, and I'm going to just kind of mold my landscape here like that. And then I'll take some, I'm going to stand to do this, it's easier. Take a blue, kind of create. This is just a hatching technique, but I can move away from the horizontal here because of course there's a lot of movement in Patterson-Newman's skies, and he's got a lovely sense of wind, cloud action. So I'm just going to find a cleaner spot on my tissue. I want a little bit more substance in my sky, so maybe I'll take this blue and then I might add some white. This is an interesting kind of greenish turquoise color. I'm going to use all the blues in my pack, at my disposal here. Again, there's this beautiful dark blue, similar to what Kazuo Nakamura used. I'll add that a little bit, just in patches. And then generally what happens in the water is we have a lot of sky colors, but water's denser than air, so the color tends to be denser. So we'll lay over. I'm going to show you a quick trick when I get this stuff covered here. I'm going to add a little bit of landscape color into my water. Just adding a little bit of the brown, which makes brown and blue together will mix into a kind of grayish tone, but also you can achieve this lovely green, the green of water. When we're looking down through water, especially if there's any reflection, we can sometimes read the bottom of the lake or the bottom of the ocean. And it gives a slightly greenish quality to the water. So now I'm going to make that flat plane by streaking it with my Kleenex back and forth. And then I'm going to still really rub into my skies. Come right down to the. And I want my land to be a little more substantial, so I might add just, let's break out of the standard colors. Maybe shape art. One thing that Kazuo Nakamura does, which I really appreciate, is that he uses the strokes to really indicate the shape of the thing that he's painting. And I think Patterson Ewan did that too with his gouging. So you've got this wonderful, we're just visually, optically blending colors here. So we're adding color, layering colors up. What shall I add here? La, 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 la. That's one, I'll push one or two hills back. And I'll do that with a bit of blue, because blue is a cooler color and it'll add a sense of something moving back in space. Try smudging this in a little more controlled way. Okay, so let's say it's a kind of rain, we're going to have some rain. In that case, what we want is we want to gray down the sky a bit. So at this stage, what can I add? Anybody have an idea of what I might add to my blue sky? Sorry, that's my face in the way because I was bending down again. What might I add? What might I lay over my blue to create gray? Anybody have an idea? Well, across the color wheel from blue is orange. And when black purple, oh, interesting suggestion. Let me try that. I'll take some of this purple, just skate this over here using another shape in the sky. I like that notion of the black purple. If I add it to the sky, that's a really great suggestion. Thank you. If I add it to the sky, I think I need to add a little bit of it to the water as well. So right away, we've got this sense of, yeah, the sky is lowering. We've got a little bit more weather coming into the painting. Drawing. Great suggestion. Thank you so much. Yeah. You know how sometimes the sky can get kind of green when there's an approaching storm. So I'll just pop in a little bit on top of the purple. We're just adding, visually mixing again colors. Go over that with the purple. You can be describing what's happening right outside your window, or you can follow along with me. So I have a few other. We have to make this. I have to make. Sorry. It's very hard to talk and do artwork at the same time. So if I sound a little discombobulated, that's why. I want to give you a very quick technique. I just need another piece of paper for. Rip it out of this thing. We will fold. Here's what I'm going to do here. A few more techniques to show you, or one more. Fold this like a ruler. And I'm going to take my eraser. And I'm just going to make lines. These are my rain lines. Well, with chalk pastel, it's just so receptive. You can just do, it's fabulous. These are like Patterson Ewan's gouges. We're gouging into the chalk pastel surface of our page.
And are you just deciding color? Are you sort of lining it up randomly or however you feel?
Well, yeah. Thanks,
Great.
Lauren. I don't know. I noticed that some of his that there was this prevailing angle, but some of them came at it from another thing, because of course different clouds would be supplying different lowering and emptying their rain onto the surface of the earth, and so they might come from a slightly different angle.
It's really impressive. I mean, I know it's an eraser, but it does look a lot like what he did, right? With
It
his,
is, it's kind of fantastic what, chalk pastel is a really lovely medium because it just, you can just lay stuff down so quickly. Okay. And, okay, I don't want to take too much more time with this one. I want to do one very quick watercolor. Whoa! Shoot, sorry, you guys.
give us a little view of Emily Carr's House of All Sorts. That's fine.
And my pants. Arrgh,
That looks super.
sorry. This is just a tightening thing I'm trying to, okay. So the last thing I want to do is just talk to you, if you need a gray sky, and get my watercolors back. I don't want to take too much more time because I want to see everybody's paintings, but you'd mix. When we mix a gray, we can use, oh. Okay, Lauren, start talking and asking people to share. Sorry, I'll do this while we're asking other people to, well, we're looking at other people's works. That'd be great. I'll just.
Perfect. Yeah, I'd
share
love
with
to.
this.
I'd really love to see what some of you have started to create here. So if you'd like to, you can essentially just hold it up. And then we have our tech support people from the AGO in the background. And when they see that you're holding something up, they can pin your video so we can get a bit of a closer look. And it's okay. We know it's work in progress. So it's okay if, you know, doesn't look quite like Kelly's, or you've played with some different techniques or gone in a different direction than she shared. All right.
Oh,
Marion. Oh, check it out.
fabulous.
Wow.
Oh, wonderful. I love what you did.
And had you done anything like that before, Marion? That sort of wet on wet?
Yeah, so I've been sort of going, I got a bit stale. I hadn't done much watercolor for a while, and wanted to get back into it. So I went back to the basics, and I got out Sultan Szabo's book,
Oh, fabulous.
Landscapes, and I just loved his style. And I just actually was trying his skies, you know, and those dramatic skies that he did. So that's what I've been doing, and I just loved what you're showing us. How you've been showing us. It's just great. I'm just so excited. So this is a work, I'd like to say, it's a work in progress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's terrific. You got a lot of action in your sky.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Ooh,
Oh, here we are looking at Carol's. Oh, look at that. I see
But the
some other
thing
pictures
is,
here.
can you hear me?
We
Yeah.
can, yeah.
Oh, I only had colored pencils. And so I did that with colored pencils.
brilliant, brilliant.
But I just
how did-
wanted to just try what you were doing, even though I didn't have what you had.
No, it's looking really good. And you know, we didn't have a lot of time to work on it, but did you apply, was that eraser or did you use pencil crayon to create this?
I just did pencil crayons. I wasn't smudging or anything. I was
Right.
just having some fun,
It looks fantastic.
but thank you.
And all those colors are in there, just like in the Patterson-Ewan one. I
Yeah,
see a lot
well,
of similarities
Yeah,
there.
I tried.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nicely done. Would anybody else care to share?
I see someone. Okay. Monique.
I don't know if
Oh, Monique, you're using watercolor.
Yeah,
And
it's
are they
sort of-
watercolor crayons?
yes. Watercolor pencils.
Fantastic. You got a lot out of those watercolor crayons. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. And so how did you create the streaks?
I actually just carved it out and then sort of used some brush work and some pencils, watercolor pencils. It's still
Terrific.
wet though.
It's great.
Thank you.
Very lovely. And all sorts of words come to mind when I see all sorts of emotions and feelings. Oh my goodness, look at that. We've got
Dale.
Margaret
Oh,
here.
Margaret and then Dale.
Oh, wow.
Margaret,
Okay.
wow. Look how much
So-
you've accomplished in a short period of
Whoa.
time.
What I was trying to do was try the wet on wet paper because I hadn't done that before. And it's a view supposedly, I live in Etobicoke, when you go down to the park and you look across Lake Ontario, you can see Toronto there. So it's supposed to be a bit of a sunrise over Lake Ontario, trying with a
It's-
wet on wet.
I love the reflection of the sunrise in the water. Really
Beautiful.
nicely done.
Brilliant idea. Wow. Look
I'm
at
impressed
that.
with how much, oh, beautiful. Is that Dale?
Yeah, it's Dale there. Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's a partly moody sky that you've created. So what blues were you using?
Truthfully, I'm not really sure. I'm brand new. This is my first watercolor. And I just have
Fantastic.
A palette of stuff, and I just wanted to see what and how to start. So.
Yeah. Oh, great. It's hard to tell. Sometimes the screen translates things a little bit differently, but you've got a lovely kind of purpley blue and a grayish tone, and that's great.
A little
Fantastic.
bit of green in there, slightly, just,
Good.
anyway.
Yeah. Nice touch.
Well, I am thoroughly impressed. Oh my goodness, we got another one here from Pat. There's some mountains.
Pat. Are those
So I
watercolor
used
pencils or
some
watercolor?
oil pastels and some watercolors too. The watercolor pencil.
Oh, that's
pencils. Yeah.
the oil pastels would act as a bit of a resist, and
Yeah.
the watercolor would kind of push away from that. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to Kelly for that brilliant lesson. I certainly learned a lot. You'll see in the chat, one of our colleagues has put in a link to a survey. We'd love your feedback about these sessions. We're thinking we're going to be changing things up slightly in the next couple of months. And so stay tuned. On the website, you'll have some additional details. So yeah, big thank you to Kelly. Big thank you to all of you.
Are there going to be more of these? Because I didn't see any more listed.
Yes, we're just,
Oh, they
yeah,
will.
they will be up on the website in a couple of days.
Okay,
So that's
fantastic.
one, and it's going to be in May in person. And then you'll see they're going to be rolling out a few months after that too. So all the details will be there probably by the end of this week or early next week, I'd say.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Lauren, thank you for a wonderful description of the two artists, and really, telling us a lot about the kind of meaning and passion that they brought to their work. And it's really lovely to share this morning with all of you. I look forward to seeing you all again.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.